Honestly, I'm a person that thrives off of mentorship. Like I love to have people to show me the ropes, and again, distributed teams. Working in a startup, you're kind of not left on your own, but you only have so much face time with people. You only have so many opportunities to get feedback. Um, so for me, like a lot of it was just like shadowing, making sure that I was listening. I think I went into it a little aggressively, feeling like things weren't as organized as I would have wanted them to be. But I realized that it's a startup, it's tech. Sometimes you just gotta fly the plane while you're building it, and that's kind of how it went.
Is it a tech podcast? Well, technically, yes. This is the show for current and future techies who are curious about exploring the world of tech. You'll get to hear from exciting guests, highlighting the diversity of roles and careers within the space, how you can get started, but also the life that comes along with it before, during, and after. My name is Stella, and this is the Technically Yes podcast. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into the Technically Yes podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Stella, and I'm joined by Kujo today. Super excited to have you here. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Kujo, let's get right into it. I'll just give a little bit of a background in terms of how we met. So, if you know me, you know I love a good networking event. And I was it was honestly very random. I had like logged in on Eventbrite. I looked at tech events near me, and DNI, which is a organization I hadn't actually even heard of before, was hosting a tech event, and that's where we met.
Yep.
So yeah, I was super excited to meet you.
Yeah. No. Like I had been networking aggressively at that point, so
Hmm.
I'd been to a DNI event before, but I think I was one of the only like black people there last time.
Really? Really?
Like there was a
Okay.
few, but yeah, I think in general, like when I'm out and about, usually like we are a minority to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
But it was great
Yeah.
bumping into you. Yeah, I think it
Okay,
was at like
nice.
a finance it or something like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It was at the Well, just at King and Spadina, which is a brand new building. If you guys don't know, we are based in downtown Toronto, and yeah, the Well is like this new sexy building in Toronto. It has like all the amenities, all that fun stuff. So yeah, the event was held there. So you said you went to a D&I event before. What was the previous event you went to?
It was hosted by Decium, so that's the company
Okay.
that does the Ordinary, like the makeup brand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
There was other like RBC, I think was there. One of the like Bell, one of those like types of finance or like
okay.
telecom companies was there. It was that type of
Yeah.
thing. I think this last one was a bit smaller in terms of
Mm-hmm.
venue and in terms of the attendance was actually crazy at this last one, but
It was so
in
busy. It
in
was so
general, like
busy.
these, yeah, no, in general though they host good events. Definitely like met a lot of like cool people at the last one
Yeah.
as well. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely be checking out future events. And I've already told a lot of people about DNI, so I'm sharing it with my network. So that's cool. So tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
what do I do? I'm a product manager right now. I'm between roles, but in my spare time, I've been recently getting more involved in civic engagement, things like that.
Oh, nice.
Um, I have a bachelor's degree in urban and regional planning, master's degree in management science, both from Ryerson. Um,
Nice.
and in general, I guess right now I'm finding myself kind of between two worlds. I'm a product manager, like I said, but also
Mm-hmm.
the civic engagement side of things. Like, we just had our mayoral election. I decided to get involved with canvassing for Chloe Brown. Um,
Oh, nice. Oh, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah, that was dope.
Listen, I was shouting, I'm not eligible to vote because I'm a permanent resident, but I was
Right.
definitely shouting vote Chloe pretty much the entire time.
Yeah.
I loved just her messaging, what she stood for, and like the fact that like she's keeping it real, which is so
Facts.
uncommon. So
Facts.
nice.
No.
Good for you.
Yeah, for me, like again, networking has been super important. I've been between roles since January-ish, and that's been
Hmm.
keeping me going. But obviously, like it's work to get yourself together and go out with the intention of looking for a job.
Yeah.
With the volunteering or with the canvassing, it actually kind of gave me a sense of fulfillment that's helping me to keep going. And also, I happen
Nice.
to connect with people who are in the tech space, like product people,
Hmm.
designers. So it's been like fulfilling on, in two different ways.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So, in regards to your journey, tell me a little bit, like, how did you get into product management? Like, did you always start there, or was it something you kind of stumbled upon? Because I
Nah,
feel like no PM starts off as a PM.
nah, definitely not. Like,
Yeah.
I got lucky. I think for me, it was the opportunity at my last role came through like an old connection.
Okay.
So, yeah, like an old friend's husband reached out to me and told me about this role at this new startup. And at the time, I was desperately seeking work. It was coming off
Mm.
of lockdown. I had been let go from my previous position, which wasn't in tech at all. I've been really pushing to try and become a data scientist. I joined Sharpest Minds, which is like a data science mentorship slash fellowship program, and
Nice.
that was going pretty well. I think honestly, like the underlying thing or the underlying like tone of my journey has just been like keep going, keep moving forward. Things will happen as long as you like orient yourself for things to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, like out of school, like undergrad, it's not supposed to be hard, but still I was burnt out. I was very busy back then with like
Mm-hmm.
extracurriculars, being involved in like church and things like that.
Yeah.
So with school and all that, I was a little burnt out after my undergrad, but went straight into my master's. Managed to finish that again, like academia, tough. So burnt out again. Bounced from uh, bounced from school to working briefly at a law firm. Then from there, I went and worked in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, again, so in 2020, got let go from there. Next year, September, you know, uh, got reached out or someone reached out to me, and I ended up in tech as a business analyst, and then job title changed to product owner that following January. And yeah, again, for me, it's been about just like orienting myself, like putting one foot in front of the other, not stopping through it all. I feel like different people dealt with lockdown differently. For me, it was quite tough. Definitely has some lows, but like I
Mm-hmm.
think remembering to find things that'll keep you going, be resilient. That's how I keep pushing
Nice.
forward.
Nice. I love that so much. It's like I love the fact that you even said like putting one foot in front of the other, right? It's just like keep going.
Hmm.
I find a lot of times we have like a vision or a goal or we know like where we want to be, but it's like there's a lot of steps to get there, right? So that in itself can be overwhelming, but it's true. It's like just by taking small bite-sized steps every single time and like knowing obviously it pays off in the long run, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
good for you. Good for
It's
you.
thank you.
Yeah.
It's small things I think even right like in your day to day just being able to
Mhm.
get your routines in place and like I'm not perfect by any means but knowing
Yeah.
that you know something as simple as like brushing your teeth can lead you to the next step in your day which takes you to what you actually are building towards like the small
Yeah.
things taking care of yourself that all adds up so yeah even on that
Yeah.
level.
It definitely does. I love that. I love that. So, in terms of your journey in tech, were you working for? You said you were working for a startup when you first started off.
Yeah.
What size company were you last with? Was it like a mid size, small as
So
well?
I think approximately like less than 200 people, but definitely
Okay.
like over like 120, maybe probably around 150. It's hard to
Okay.
keep track of. It was distributed, right? Like I live
Mm-hmm.
in Toronto and I was working for a company that was based in New York.
Okay.
Um, I had teammates all over the place. Size of the company, I'd say was around there, like maybe 150-ish.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, so I mean, I find like for myself, when I first started off, I was working for a small company,
Mm,
and people don't understand the amount of work that goes in to working for a small company, but also the amount of
facts.
skills that you pick up along the way. So, how was
Yeah.
that for you? How was that experience for you? Did you find that you were wearing like 100 hats at work?
Yeah, like for me, it was a situation where I had to get things up to speed. Honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a person that thrives off of mentorship. Like I love to have people to show me the ropes, and again, distributed teams. Working in a startup, you're kind of not left on your own, but you only have so much face time with people. You only have so many opportunities to get feedback. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, like a lot of it was just like shadowing, making sure that I was listening. I think I went into it a little aggressively, feeling like things weren't as organized as I would have wanted them to be. But
Mm-hmm.
I realized that it's a startup, it's tech. Sometimes you just gotta fly the plane while you're building it, and that's kind of how it went.
Yeah.
Definitely, if I'm being completely honest, like I have an anxious kind of approach to things, so I think I was nervous for much of it. But looking
Mm-hmm.
back on it, I learned a lot, and I think for me, it was definitely a reminder like, hey, like imposter syndrome is a thing, but you don't need to lean into it like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
People
Mm-hmm.
also don't know what they're doing. They also like,
Yeah.
are guessing and testing or like, making mistakes as they learn,
Oh
even if
yeah.
they're C-suite, whatever, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, just be
Yes.
kind to yourself on that level. Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much. And it's so important to hear because, I mean, especially depending on the background that you have and how you kind of got into the tech space, like it can be nerve wracking. And like
Mhm.
speaking of that, being a minority in tech, like how did that add to that anxiousness? How did that add to the imposter syndrome, or did it at all?
Well, I think for me, like being black has been obviously a lifelong thing, but it's changed over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned, like growing up in the church, and that was to me like the blackest space I was in. Going to school, I was very much like token black kid for a lot of my experience, and that's like led to different types of dynamics and things like that that I've had to reflect on and like really kind of deal with. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Bringing it back like to the present, kind of like 2020, right? We all know what happened. We had like
Mm-hmm.
a big wave of people pushing back, us being tired of status quo, and that like woke me up a lot. Bringing it back into work and tech, for me, it was kind of a thing where a lot of the time I felt personally that DEI kind of they just people play lip service to it, and it only goes so far
Mm-hmm.
within the context of like a work situation.
Yeah.
Um, and overall, I think for me, like being a minority in tech is about knowing who your allies are, knowing how to advocate for yourself, and knowing when it's worthwhile to actually like speak up. There's
Mm-hmm.
definitely moments where like things are completely like out of hand and you need to speak up for yourself. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's other times where it feels like you might be um, burning capital, if that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
I think it's important to recognize that obviously you need to advocate for yourself and you need to put yourself in environments that are healthy. But
Mm-hmm.
also on the flip side, like sometimes I hear about people I know getting referred to as like always playing the race card or always like trying to push that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously unfair to the person, but that's kind of like the reputation you get in these spaces if you're super
Yeah.
outspoken.
Yeah,
So being
unfortunately.
aware of that, but still choosing yourself at the end of the day, that's kind of where I'm at with
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when it comes to like finding your allies, like what does that look like for you? Is it a matter of like just noticing how people move in the workplace or seeking out those people within the DEI, like people that maybe
Mm.
aren't of color that are participating? Like what does that look like for
Like
someone that would be in the space? Yeah.
for me, I think like giving people the benefit of the doubt,
Mm-hmm.
because allies can come from anywhere. I don't think uh, problematic people or people who don't stick to being politically correct all the time necessarily always you're going to be your worst enemy. There's always people who can talk the talk, but they don't actually walk the walk.
Mm-hmm.
So giving people the benefit of the doubt is the first step, but then also having very like firm and like clear boundaries
Yeah.
because you can't constantly be angry. Like we all deal with what we deal with, but you can't constantly be angry in your interactions, right? You have to give people space to be human. So
Mm-hmm.
in doing that, just be open. Obviously, like have your boundaries, and then just know how to pick your battles. Because at the end of the day, somebody who you might consider like um, not somebody who you would hang out with in real life, maybe, but in a workplace setting, like that's your guy. That's someone you can count on because at
Mm-hmm.
the very least they're able to do their job and help you do yours. So on that
Yeah.
level, it's like a balancing act a bit.
Okay, makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting that you even say that. Like, it may not be someone you're hanging out with outside of work, but
Hmm.
at work, they're like your work bestie, right? And it's
Hmm.
interesting. I was watching a TikTok yesterday and how this girl quit her job and she's like, it's going to be so hard leaving this person. But she's
Hmm.
like, really, when you look at the person, it's like, she's like, I probably wouldn't spend time with them, but they're so integral to her every day, right? When she shows up in the
Yeah.
office. So I completely understand that.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the benefits you have seen or found like by being in the tech space?
That money though, it's nice. Like
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
like getting paid in USD, the conversion is obviously great.
Hmm.
Other benefits are like generally speaking, you don't really have to do the corporate thing of like getting all fancy and stuff like that. People
Yes.
like at least are more down to earth with the way you
Hmm.
present yourself. Like obviously you still want to show up with professionalism, but you can, like you can show up as your authentic self.
Yes.
Aside from that, like I've met people from all over the place. Like I have had team members from uh, Brazil. Like there's a guy in Ukraine that was on our team, like living in
Mm-hmm.
Ukraine. So that's like just imagine, right?
Yeah. Oh
Um,
gosh.
you know,
There's so
people
much
in the States,
happening.
obviously, so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's so much happening around the world, but just being
Mm-hmm.
exposed to like different types of people from all over the place, and just
Mm-hmm.
realizing we're all a lot more similar than we realize, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that so refreshing because I work both corporate and I freelance. And I
mm,
find one of the things that I love about tech is like I can seek out to collaborate with people that are like literally anywhere in the world, right?
yep,
And although we don't speak the same language, we do speak the same language. Because when it comes
mm,
down to like the technical aspect, like it's all the same. It doesn't change no
mm,
matter where you are. And I find that to be so refreshing because in other industries, you do have those barriers, right? Where it's like I can only collaborate with people that live in my city, in my country, etc. But I find tech just opens up your world, and like it's so diverse, right? Um,
definitely,
Although it is diverse, I mean, you still have moments like the diversity on a grand scale is there, but
yeah,
then I find like on the more micro, like in the office, it can be very
yeah,
different, right? So
yeah.
it's interesting for sure. Now, what would you say are some of the downsides? Like, have you seen anything or experienced things that you're just like, ugh.
Yeah, like obviously, like we know what the economy is like right now, and as I
Mm-hmm,
mentioned, I've been between roles since January, and for me that happened pretty suddenly, right? And it
mm-hmm,
wasn't even a situation where myself or my team or the people that were let go around the same time as me, like none of us weren't doing a good job. It just that's what it was, right? That's what it needed
yeah,
to be. So
mm-hmm,
they let us go. I think the thing with tech that a lot of people forget is that it's still business, right? Like at the end of the day, the bottom line, no matter what people tell you, that's what they're concerned with, right?
mm-hmm,
So it's hard to stay in the mentality of like happy go lucky, like everything is great when like you're still it's still a business. You still got to advocate for
mm-hmm,
yourself. You still got to know when
mm-hmm,
be able to read the tea leaves a little bit, tell when things are going a type of way. And at the end of the day, like not having a physical office that you can access sometimes can be a downside. I personally like working from home, but I
mm-hmm,
think not being able to just like have FaceTime with people can get in the way of getting work done to an extent because there's a lot that can happen online, obviously, but
mm-hmm.
being able to share energy and be able to tell like what level you're on with somebody, being able to plan ahead based on face to face conversations is slightly different from doing that online.
Yeah,
So it's kind of a
yeah.
mixed bag in that sense.
Nice. I'm so happy you mentioned that because you being a product manager, it's like a boots on the ground type of role. And it's yes, you can definitely do it remote, but I find that, yeah, the most successful product managers, they want to sit next to the dev. They want to sit next to, all of their stakeholders, whether it's customer service, sales, whatever, so that they can really collaborate and to get a true understanding of what the user needs, right? So I can completely understand that. So as a PM that is working remote, I know you probably have like tons of meetings. Like when you were in your role, you were probably like always in those Zoom calls, stuff like that. Like, how do you manage that? And how do you ensure that like you're still able to execute and do things well, although you don't have that face to face?
I think you got to be very diligent with how you manage your time.
Mm,
Um, I'm not always the best at that, and we're all human. But at the end of
mm-hmm,
the day, knowing when things are happening, and then also being able to follow up, if things feel like they're going astray. So just be diligent with
mm-hmm,
your time. And then additionally, like you know, just making sure that you're talking to the right people on a regular basis, whether like you're doing a scrum, so you have like your stand-ups, or you have whatever structure you're in, just making sure that those important meetings, and you'll know which ones are which, right? You got to talk to your team if you're in that type of role. You got to talk to your
mm-hmm.
bosses every once in a while. Making sure that those meetings happen to me are the way that you stay on track. um,
Okay.
it's like once you start to fall out of sync, or you're not able to track when things are getting done or when they're supposed to get done. Once you lose track of your time management, that's when things start to fall apart.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm,
in general, I think tech is kind of forgiving, right? Like ideally you want to be perfect, but at the same time, people know things happen, right? There's a lot of goodwill out there in spite of everything that we see online. There's people who are going through different things, so they'll understand if you're falling behind. So being
mm-hmm.
able to make sure that you're honest about where you are in terms of your work, in terms of you know um, just what you're planning ahead, what you're trying to get done, being able to
Mm-hmm.
reach out to people and have relationships, all of that.
Yeah.
factors into being successful.
Okay. Yeah, nice. No, I love that. So for someone that's not in tech, let's say you're talking to your grandmother, how would you explain product management?
I feel like I got in trouble for saying this to somebody recently, but
Yeah.
to me, like product management is it's similar to project management. Like there's definitely transferable skills, right? But
Mhm.
it's a
Mhm.
different like the end result is different. Like our projects can last forever, right? But our product technically you're releasing constantly, right? So
Yeah.
to me it's those like project management skills, like your task management, your time management skills, but in the context of, for me, like it was software as a service, right? So those
Okay.
iterations going through the cycle of eliciting requirements, documentation, working with your devs and your design teams. Um, that's how I would describe it. It's like you're basically building things, but the context isn't going to be in the sense of a project, quote unquote. It's a product, right? So that
Mhm.
includes marketing and all of these things that factor in as well, like making sure that you have a broader understanding of the things that are at play around your
Mhm.
product.
Mhm. I was trying to look up a quote that I saw on LinkedIn this morning, but I can't find it. I was on my feed, but I follow like all these PMs that are like pretty amazing. I think his name's Akash Gupta, I think. But he had written something about like if you're a PM, because you know how some teams they have a PM and a project manager, and
Yeah.
he's like it's completely unnecessary because your PM should be able to do the work of a project manager. So I completely agree, and yeah, I know it's definitely a controversial opinion to have. And you hear all these things about like being the CEO of the product, but like you're not making
Mm,
like the decisions and things like that. So it's like everyone has their own take.
mm,
And like one thing I find too is that it's very industry, oh, sorry, it's very company specific, I should say.
mm.
Like everyone runs product management so different. Like if you look at Amazon versus Facebook versus, I mean, former Twitter, because I don't really know what Elon's doing these days, but at the time, anyways, like
Yeah.
it's just ran so differently. So I can totally see why you have that opinion, and I kind of agree with you. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
can see that. Hmm.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So when it came to like even getting into the tech space, like do you prior to even getting in, did you have friends, family and stuff like that that were in the tech space that were working in tech? Or like what even kind of alerted you to the fact that that was a possibility besides, of course, your friend kind of putting you onto that startup?
Yeah. In general, I think like coming from it from a data perspective,
Mm-hmm.
data science has been huge, still huge. I feel like whatever role you are in tech, you need to be able to understand data because
Mm-hmm.
essentially what you're doing is transforming data. That's what
Yeah.
everybody's job is. Um, but for me, it was like the data angle. I didn't really understand like the engineering side or the
Mm-hmm.
design side of it before I started working in it.
Mm-hmm.
But data was my way in, right? And again, once you get into tech, you realize like you're taking requirements. That's like one form of data, right? Then you're
Mm-hmm.
turning them into documentation.
Mm-hmm.
That's another form of data, communicating them to design and engineering. So everybody's
Mm-hmm.
transforming the data that you gathered so that it can be used to build the product at the end of the day, right? So that was kind of mentally my angle into it, but it turns out that it's very much logistical from the product manager perspective, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
everything is based on knowing what needs to be done and how long it's going to take and what type of resources. So on that level, that kind of is where my mind has shifted to, right? And that's why I refer to project management because it's to me like analogous. But at the end of the day, you can come at tech from a bunch of different angles, right? There's marketing involved, there's sales, uh, again, UI, UX, and engineering as well, right? It's being able to translate between those different worlds or those different viewpoints that to me makes tech tech.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, traditional businesses require the same types of knowledge and skill sets, but like tech happens so fast and you iterate so much, and you're allowed to break things in a way
Mm-hmm.
that's like different. Like obviously, you have to prototype and iterate whatever you're building, but like being
Mm-hmm.
able to do that in a virtual space makes it a different type of beast, right? So
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Yeah, no, it's true. Tech is, I mean, it's so different and it moves so fast. I remember when I first started coding, and I mean, till now, it's one of those things. It's like even if you try to take on a certain skill set, if you take a couple of years and you take, you're not really like working in that space or working on that skill set, you're most likely going to have not necessarily start from scratch, but you have a lot to like relearn because
Mm,
it's insane how fast it moves. But it also makes it exciting, right? And that's one of the things I like is the fact that, especially as we're seeing more people of color, Black women coming into the tech space, it's like with the amount of, like with the quickness in which it moves, it allows you to also insert yourself and actually make a change, right? And have an
facts.
opinion and to contribute to it because it does move so rapidly. Versus if you look at it like a very traditional system, it's so hard to like implement change there because there's not much happening, right? So you
Mm,
kind of just plug and play, you just become an employee and you can't really contribute that much. So yeah,
right.
that's cool. That's cool. So in terms of what do you find like the tech space is lacking? Like, is there anything right now that you see like there could definitely be more of this?
Honestly, I feel like I'm young in the space, and
Mhm.
honestly, I feel like most of the answers I've given are kind of from a naive perspective. But at the same time, I don't want to say that I don't have a good perspective on this because I do think like the DEI thing, the
Mhm.
like specifically like I'm a black person, so for me, blackness, being
Right.
able to see blackness manifest itself in tech in a way that isn't diluted or like co-opted. We don't have too many spaces that are genuinely and solely ours. And not
Mhm.
to say that we want to like I don't believe that segregation is any type of solution, but like for us to have things for ourselves and then also be able to share them in a way that doesn't disempower us,
Mhm.
that to me like as a broader concept.
That's
But in
cool.
general, I think like just making tech accessible for people who think that they wouldn't be able to get into it. I think there
Mhm.
needs to be more around that. And there's tons of like recruiters and stuff like that out there that focus on different demographics of people. But I think if there is a way to get people like coming back to imposter syndrome to forget the fact that like, oh, I don't have a degree or oh, I haven't done this before, and just involve themselves, because
Mhm.
the thing that makes tech cool is that it comes from everybody's ideas coming together and building something, right? Like to me, like something that I like to say, like might not always be the case, but when it does work out, teamwork makes the dream work, right? So being able to find ways to allow people in so that they can
Mhm.
contribute in the ways that they can contribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
just broader
No,
pie in the sky type of
100%.
thinking.
100%. I completely agree. I mean, that's why this podcast even exists, right? Is the fact that I do want to highlight the different paths that people have taken, but also like what's available
Mm,
to us within the tech space, right? The imposter syndrome is huge, and it's so easy to get caught up in that, right? When you come into work or even as you're applying,
yeah,
and yeah, it's so important to know that like there is space for you. You belong here, and also we can collaborate in order to make this thing happen, right? We can find
exactly.
different ways to like, yeah, make it work. So in a perfect world, what's on the horizon for you? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
The next 5 years.
Hmm.
So I mentioned like the civic engagement stuff. I want to keep doing that. I want to start a podcast. I just want to be able to inform people about on the civic engagement level, things that are happening in the city, things that they can get
Yeah.
involved in. Elections are going to keep happening, so people need to stay informed.
Hmm.
So that I'd like to keep going. And then when it comes to tech, I do want to keep working as a product person. Like I find it very fulfilling. Again, teamwork makes the dream work, and being able to coordinate all of that, I find fulfillment in that. In general, in terms of like life overall, it would be kind of nice to have a nice crib and like be settled in with the girlfriend and all that. But
Hmm.
we'll see. God willing.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's up to him, right? But I wish you guys the best of luck. And of course, I mean, it's one of those things where I think anything's possible, right? And it's like it's better to set our sights high and kind of, aim for
Oh
that,
yeah,
and not play small, right?
nah, definitely
Um,
not.
so I love the aspect of like still keeping that civic engagement alive and like still having your tech goals. Do you ever see that there might be a crossover there between what you would be doing from like a, yeah,
For
political
sure.
kind of standpoint? Yeah.
Yeah, bringing it back to like the Chloe Brown campaign, I think most of her engagement came from just being online, right? That's huge. Like Twitter was huge,
100%.
TikTok was huge, all of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Again, I was like more canvassing, so doing things in person, but that
Mm.
that part of the campaign those guys should be super proud of themselves because they managed to, without a proper political engine behind them, build such a huge movement, grassroots, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
we've seen that in like larger cases, right, with like the Arab Spring and other movements throughout like the last couple decades. I think
Mm-hmm.
the ability for the internet to allow people to empower themselves, I'd like to see that type of thing become more the norm.
Nice.
Like you said, Elon's Eloning, so I don't know like
Exactly.
what's going on with Twitter,
Yeah.
but in general, right?
Threads. We're
Like,
gonna be doing threads from now on.
do you really want to mix your Twitter life with your Instagram life, though? I feel like that's a lot of
I
people's
know.
dilemma, right?
That's what I was saying yesterday to my friend because, like, from a tech perspective, I'm like, I'm so different on every platform. Like, I have TikTok, where I act a fool. I have like Instagram, where it's like the aesthetics and whatnot, where I like
Yeah,
barely even post. And then Twitter is like, I'm like incognito on Twitter. Like, people don't even
yeah,
know who I am. I'm like in the
right,
comments. I'm like stirring things up. I'm like, exerting my opinion, but it's like no one even knows. So I'm like, do I
right.
really want, like, how would I treat this platform?
Yes,
And then I was telling my friend, I was like, I'm like, how do I even say? Because like on Twitter, we're like, tweet me. I was like, oh, stitch me. And she was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm like, we need to figure it out. I'm like, someone needs to start figuring it out. Because yeah, it's one of those things. I feel like I get so like caught up in my, like, social media for me has always like been a little bit of a funny thing regardless. But
hmm,
I'm like, I'm used to life over here,
hmm,
So I'm like,
hmm.
how am I gonna? What am I even gonna be saying over there? Who am I gonna offend? Who am I? You know what I mean? So
I heard Threads is like, happy go lucky right now. People are
that's what
just
I
talking
heard.
about their day and like,
That's
using it
that's
as
what
like a
that's what she
open
said.
diary, right? Like that's what it's like over there right now. But
Yeah,
I hate to be a pessimist, but if we know how social media works, eventually things end up just
that's it.
becoming a little
That's
toxic.
yeah.
So
Eventually, but you know what? I hope the positive people stay positive. Because I'm definitely like I'm gonna check it out.
yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things. Like, things, once again, things change so rapidly.
Mm,
And the more people get on one thing, and then the more they update the algorithm to ensure, like, hey, this is the type of content we even
yeah.
want to push. Because it's the same thing
It,
with TikTok. Like, the
mm,
algorithm changes so often and so frequently, where it's like, what are we even going to be seeing 6 months
mm,
from now, a year from
yeah.
now? So yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure. So um, in regards to books, I always like to ask my guests what their favorite book is and if they have any
Yeah.
book recommendations. Do you
Yeah.
have anything for us?
Yeah. I think All About Love by Bell Hooks.
Okay.
On the topic of social media and stuff like that, like, if we're talking hot tops, we just saw what happened with Kiki and her men.
Whew.
Um, you know,
What's your
um,
opinion on that? Let's segue a little bit.
Look, as a straight man, I feel like I don't have an opinion. Whatever black women are saying, I agree with. But like
Okay.
in general,
Fair
for me, it's
enough.
like if you're in a relationship with someone, right, or not,
Hmm.
even if
Hmm.
like you share a child with that person, like
Yeah.
it's not your job to police their behavior, right? Like obviously you should have boundaries, and like if they're
Hmm.
wilding, you gotta let them know. But she was at a Usher concert, my guy. Like,
Yeah.
you know what happens at an Usher concert? Usher comes up to women and he sings to
Yeah.
them, right?
Listen, was
Especially
it
if they're
didn't
Kiki.
exactly. Exactly. Cause she's like, I mean, she was always hot, let's be real. But like now she's like, God damn. Like it's a lot.
And
So I get it.
no, but mans were posting her, I think, right before that too, right? Like showing off her body. Um,
Exactly.
but to me, it's like
Exactly.
the reason why I bring up All About Love is because it's like very instructive when it comes to um, like in this day and age. I feel like a lot of people don't know where to find love, whether it's romantic
Mm-hmm.
or platonic. I think I
Mm-hmm.
might add another book to that called Platonic. That one is about friendship. People
Okay.
don't take friendship seriously these days, and I feel like that's a problem. That book
Okay.
also has a section on being a minority and dealing with like friendship dynamics in that sense. But coming back to All About Love, like understanding that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to have love show up in complex ways, but it's never okay to like
Mm-hmm.
try and control somebody, because
Mm-hmm.
that's not what anybody wants
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, like I think Bell Hooks is she's really good because she's super honest, and like you feel like you're getting your
Mm-hmm.
ass whooped the whole time you're reading, but it's not in a
Right.
like self help way. It's in a like
Yeah.
encouraging you to do better or to know better type of way.
Oh, I
I
love
think
that.
if I was going to give one more recommendation, I'd say The Will to Change. For all the
Okay.
fellas out there, that one, like she's pretty fair in that book, right? She talks about patriarchy and the role that both men and women play in it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and in general, it's hard to have those conversations in a serious context without it devolving into gender wars, right? Like it happens every
Mm-hmm.
day. But having a voice that kind of like speaks to what men might be thinking or feeling without necessarily coming from a man. So
Mm-hmm.
you have a black woman advocating for men to do better,
Yeah.
but also advocating for women to help men do better, give them the space to grow and all that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just again, teamwork makes the dream work. There's obviously more than two genders, but at the end of the day, like we all need to come together in order to be able to appreciate each other and love each other
Mm-hmm.
outside of like that the patriarchy and hegemony that we live under. So
Yeah.
like yeah, in general, like I gotta give credit to my girl again. She put
Mm-hmm.
me on to reading big time, and
Love it.
yeah, bell hooks
Oh, I
definitely
love that.
instructive.
I love that. That's so important. That's so great. Well, we have some books to read. I have not read any of those books. I am familiar with her, but
Mhm.
haven't read any of that. So I'll definitely be checking that out. So if someone wants to connect with you, where can they find you?
Usually LinkedIn is my go-to when I'm out and about networking. I'm
Yeah.
not a super huge poster on LinkedIn, but it's definitely useful for just building connections and, as a
Mm-hmm.
social media platform in that sense.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep my other socials to myself for now.
Yeah.
I don't
Fair enough.
necessarily, I don't necessarily like post a lot on Insta, but I am on there.
Yeah.
If you can find me, you can find me. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Twitter as well, but like you said, like I'm not necessarily anonymous, but I don't want to be in the mix
Yeah,
like
of
that. So
course. Of
yeah,
course. And it's like, especially with the topic and what we're talking about, I think LinkedIn is most appropriate. So I'll
for sure.
definitely put that in the show description, in the notes, in the event that anyone wants to connect with you. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much for coming on today. This was a great talk. It was so nice, really getting to learn a bit more about your journey. I wish you the best on your job hunt. I know how that can be. But I mean, I have no doubt you'll be finding something soon. And of course, we
Appreciate
also
that.
have to be careful with also making sure we get into the right spaces as well, that we're not just taking on anything that comes our way. So, yeah, I
Mm,
wish you the best of luck and thanks
thank
so
you.
much again. Thank you so much for tuning into the Technically Yes podcast. If you liked today's episode, rate this podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if you would like to get in touch with me, reach out to me on Instagram at the Tech Yes Pod and find me and subscribe on YouTube by looking at the Technically Yes podcast. Thanks again and chat to you guys next week.